Ketter at the Cabin presents BOC with Ketter. Fly fishing, stories, connection. Now pour yourself a drink. All right, welcome back to another episode of BOC with Ketter. This is officially season 2, everyone. I didn't think I was going to make it this far, but we're here. This is season 2, episode 1, and I'm happy to introduce another special guest. I'll go ahead and kick it off to you, man.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, my name is Max Strickland. I'm here to talk about fishing and just all the little nuances and things that I've learned. So,
Amen to that. Awesome, Max. I do got to ask you, what are you sipping on this fine evening?
I've got a gin and tonic myself.
Not bad, brother. Not bad. I'm working with the Samuel Adams Winter Lager. It is winter, and it is a good beer, so I figured why not.
Yeah, absolutely.
Got a little beer, and I even got some peanuts today. I was like, beer and peanuts, it's one of the best combos in the world.
Absolutely. Can't go wrong.
Awesome. You cannot go wrong. Awesome. So Max and I, we've just kind of communicated over Instagram over the last year and just kind of talking fish and fishy dudes just talking fish. And we decided we were going to kind of focus this conversation around steelhead fishing. So first question I will ask you, Max, in your opinion, what makes steelhead fishing so special in, the Wisconsin and Minnesota region?
Yeah. I mean, it's the fact and the allure that it's just right in our backyard. A lot of people, when they think of steelhead, they think of, the Pacific Northwest. They think of, destination fishing and, there's a lot of really awesome fishing out there. But, to have some of this just in our backyard is just, a lot of times I think we take it for granted. Which is fine. Some people love the opportunity and they take, a lot of, they take advantage of it, and other people miss out on it. And, it's just kind of one of those things where, depending upon where you're at, you're either in or you're out, but you can get in at any time, which is nice. So
Agreed. I couldn't agree more with that statement. I spent a lot of time in Duluth in my lifetime, and it was a time when I didn't really even fish at all. I mean, if I did, it was just for fun and just getting out with the boys and stuff. And yeah, I didn't realize what was, in literally my backyard. And now it's like, wow, if I lived up there again, life would be a lot different.
yeah, absolutely.
It's a beautiful, beautiful area, and awesome. So we're gonna dive right into one of the hot topics in this kind of conversation. Can you explain the difference between Great Lakes steelhead and their Pacific counterparts?
Yeah. You hear the saying "no salt, no steel," and I'm not a fishologist or a fish expert on this, but I'll offer what I know. There is a difference, and it's important to note that difference. One of the biggest differences just being, the migration patterns. Here they're stocked, and they go from the Great Lakes to the river. They spawn and they leave. Whereas in the ocean, they're born in the river and then they go in the ocean. So with that, you have a lot of different dietary things that you see. Their diets are different. Their migratory patterns are a lot different. So we're spoiled with what we have, but there is a difference, and it's important to note that difference. So.
Yes, agreed. I know it's a very, very hot topic in the fly fishing world and in the steelhead world especially.
Yeah, it's for sure.
You see some merch and stuff out there too. It's like no salt, no steel. It's funny. It's cool. I think it's a very good conversation for everyone to have. That's for sure. Have you personally ever been out to the Pacific Northwest?
I have not. It's one of the things that I will do at some point. Unfortunately, right now it hasn't lined up for that to happen, which is all right. It's one of those things. You keep it on the back of your mind, and at some point an opportunity will present itself, and when it does, I'm gonna take full advantage of it for sure. But right now, for me personally, it hasn't lined up to be in the cards, and that's all right. So
Absolutely. I agree. As an angler, you can get overwhelmed quickly with destinations and wanting to do stuff, and it's like, yeah, your backyard, home waters are great. They can be great, but like we'll always just have that natural instinct to want to explore because that's probably why 98% of anglers get into it is because they just like to explore and be
Yeah,
outside.
and
So
that's what that's what fishing is, right? It takes us to new places, and we find we find out a lot about ourselves, and we find out a lot about the world, and it's just it's a pretty cool thing we get to do.
you could say that again, man. Are you tying a fly right now, Max?
I
Bring
am
that
indeed.
bring that camera down just like an inch, and we can see what you're working with. There you
So
go.
I'm
What are you
I'm
working on?
actually I'm working on a couple different pike flies right now. I not necessarily fitting. We might we talked about it. We might dabble on that a little bit later.
I think we
Um,
will.
yeah, but yeah, I've it's one of those things where you know a lot of times my brain drifts. Kind of referencing back. Just there's so many different opportunities, and I do a lot of pike and muskie on the fly, and that's been really resonating with me a lot of late. So I'm yeah, just working on a lot of different patterns. I'm hopefully gonna, or tonight I guess I'm hopefully gonna play around with a little different shanks and get some jointed action going on some of those flies. So we're just kind of not necessarily a specific pattern, a lot of different patterns that I like to think about and kind of be like, yeah, that's a good thing, or maybe I'll take something from that pattern or another, and just kind of tie into it. So you'll see me doing this a lot. I'm just reaching
No,
for the
you're good.
tools.
I
So
love it, man. That's awesome. That's awesome. I haven't had someone come on and just like tie like this. This is fun to see.
yeah,
It's something I need to. I don't personally. I've tied a few, but I'm not like confident in it, and it's definitely something I want to add to my repertoire in 2026. That's for sure.
yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things where honestly, I have probably tied the ugliest flies known to man. I like to, the process for me is you tie, you try, you fail, and you say, okay, what didn't I like about it? What didn't the fish like about it? And then you retie, you retry, and you succeed, or you retie, you retry, and you fail again, and you just get stuck in that loop. And I have I've loved it every second of it. I've absolutely loved it. So
That's awesome, man. That's really cool. Yeah, I got a little kit and all that jazz. Obviously, just a cheap one and stuff. And it's like, all right, I need to dedicate at least a couple nights to just really focus in and kind of learn that craft and just have it be part of my everyday life moving forward. Because I think it's important to be able to do that, especially as a fly fisherman.
yeah, for sure.
Awesome. So I'll take you back a little bit to our region. I know we kind of went to a little talking about the Pacific Northwest, but in the Minnesota, Wisconsin region, what would you say is the best time of this season to go and chase steelhead?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the times, at least a lot of the popular times are, spawning times are usually pretty popular. Um, so it's pretty interesting. A lot of people will kind of, be, yep, spawn is, the best time to target them, and a lot of people are like, I don't really like that spawn is when we target them because they're pretty sensitive or susceptible. A lot of times, like take the hens for example. They're laying eggs, they're tired, and they're looking for a quick meal, which means that you're probably going to have some pretty good luck. But it's is it really the most ethical way to target them? But unfortunately, that's usually the only times that they kind of run. And so it's kind of that double-edged sword where as an angler, you want to make sure, you're putting yourself in the best position to catch fish, but, are you doing it the most ethical way? And, the DNR and, they've done a pretty good job as far as, protecting spawning grounds and, trying to do their best. But at some point, people are going to target them the way they know how to catch fish, whether it's, on a fly rod, center pin, using spawn sack, and, however they catch the most fish, that's when they're going to want to fish, which again, it makes sense. I see that point to it, but unfortunately, I wish, there was a better way to target them when they were, you know, when they weren't in that, susceptible state. But
Agreed. Yeah, I agree. It's what's really cool about the driftless region and where I'm at is like in Minnesota for the most part, trout inland shuts down. There's a couple spots, couple state parks you can do it. On the Root River in Lanesboro you can fish, but soon as that, after October, they go into that spawn season and it shuts down. So you literally cannot be out, on the rivers, like, walking through and just stirring stuff up. And that's really nice. I think that's important. And Wisconsin inland entirely closed until, as in like 4 days ago, it opened back up. So it is cool that that is a protection that just kind of naturally happens. And like, obviously, you're not going to go out if you legally can't fish. So I do think that is very cool that that happens. It's a good time of the year to get caught up on other stuff too, as someone who would go every day if he could.
Yeah, I get that feeling. There's a lot of times where, at the beginning of the season, I'm like, I've got so much time to do all this. And then, it's the end of the season and I'm like, holy cow, where did the time go?
Yep, it just creeps on you
So
every year.
it sure does.
That's awesome. So, in your opinion, what kind of water should anglers be looking for when reading these steelhead rivers? Especially someone like me who is used to driftless, tiny little streams. When I went up, to that area and I seen these big, big rivers, I was like, how do I read this? How do I even start? What have you kind of learned about that?
The biggest thing that I have learned is there is no such water as not steelhead water. I have seen fish in the craziest spots. I have hooked up in fish where I'm just, I got my rod and I'm just kind of, half, just throwing it in there, not really trying to focus on catch a fish. And all of a sudden, I've got a tug, and that's, then we're on. So the one thing I've definitely learned in my experience, again, I talk about steelhead fishing from a guy who is, I'm not a guide by any, stretch of the imagination. I do it because I think it's fun, and I've, been fortunate enough to have had a lot of successors and guys that have put in way more time than I have, kind of just say, okay, this is what you're doing, this is why you're doing it. And they've just been super beneficial. In that regard, saved me a lot of headaches and heartbreaks. Honestly, when I'm fishing, there's certain types of water that I'm looking at, whether it's you know when they're moving, I'm looking at faster stuff, and I'm just kind of trying to have that mindset of, all right, think like a steelhead, have your brain thinking, I'm hungry, where's the food going to be, what's the food going to be, kind of having that mindset of I'm not 100% certain, but I'm just going to try. And then kind of in that too, just being as positive as you can be. Steelheading is not for the faint of heart. If you're the kind of guy that wants to go out and catch 10 fish in a day, I hate to be brutally honest, but steelheading's not for you. So yeah, I mean, there's I really wish that I had a really good hard and fast rule, but honestly, it's there are some days where I fish all the spots and I'm like, man, that looks great. That stretch of river, there's just got to be stacked up in there. I don't catch a fish, and then I'm walking back to the landing, and all of a sudden I see a steelhead jump, and I'm like, why is it there? You just yeah.
That's
So
cool.
it's
I feel like that adds to the kind of lure of it all. Just like the you never really know.
yeah, no, for sure, and it's one of those things where it's kind of you kind of get that mantra of like like any given Sunday, you never know what's going to happen, you don't know what's going to show up, and it adds to the allure, like you're talking about, of showing up and fishing for them, and you know that's why kind of the why you show up, and then when something really spontaneous like that happens, you're like, yep, and I'll be back again next week to do it all over again.
Exactly. I
So
guarantee. Yeah, that's got to pull people back.
yeah.
That's awesome. So, without giving out, obviously any secrets or anything like that, but what rod and kind of setup do you like to run? You don't have to go into full detail on any of
Yeah.
that if you don't want to.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I appreciate the respect out of that. But personally, I don't really, the rod doesn't, land you fish. It just helps. Um,
Just a tool, right?
yeah, absolutely.
Depends how you
Um,
use it.
yeah, for steelheading on the fly specifically, I really like a 7 or an 8 weight. I've hooked and landed them on the 6 weight, and it's a little light for my liking. I've really kind of found a really good soft spot to be in that 7 weight. I really like that 7 weight. I'm a firm believer that the reel definitely matters more than the fish. I can't say that I said that myself. I believe it was Kenny Gallup that was talking about it. Um, and he was just talking about, I'd rather have, a $50 rod if it meant that I had a couple $100 reel and line especially, steelhead, I think their top speed's like 15 to 18 miles an hour. And, yeah. And when you catch them, they're going downriver. So there have been times where, you hook into a fresh fish and you just hang on and it's peel and drag. You can't do anything about it. I remember early on, I had hooked up into one and it just ripped and ripped and ripped. And I'm thinking there's no way I'm going to land the fish. I didn't land the fish. But I'm like, that had to have been a king. Like it had to have been a king, like a big coho. And, my buddy's like, it's possible, but, you catch a fresh steelhead and, they'll take you for everything you got and then some.
Dude, that's incredible. I mean, full disclosure, like I've steelhead fished once in my life. It was last March, the second weekend it was open, and yeah, it might as well been a foreign world to me from what I'm used to and what the fish I'm used to catching. I mean, down here, I've never broke to the 20 club. I can be fully honest with everyone on that. Never broke that 20 club, and like you get so used to, at least me, catching those little trout where it's like that's just how kind of muscle memory. And then I started getting into pike fishing a little more, and I was like, whoa,
Yeah.
this is not, you can't,
Yeah.
you probably see my video. I look like a goofball in one of them because I'm like, I don't know how to fight this thing. Like, this is ridiculous. But yeah, I can't imagine what that steelhead starts to move like that. That's got to just be straight adrenaline pump.
Yeah. No, and I mean, like I said, if we have time and you want to, we can talk into some pike.
Yeah, we will.
I had the opportunity to get one pike over 40 on the fly this summer, and it was just, I mean, it's just unreal. I mean, I caught that fish in moving water and,
Oh, really?
Yeah, I had to tire that thing out. Like that's when we were able to land it. I mean, I felt the bite, which was sweet because sometimes it doesn't happen. And there are other times where I had a couple, lower to upper 30s that, I'm stripping and in my paws, they'll take and there's too much slack and then I strip and it's like, oh, that's a rock. And then the rock moves and then you're like, game on.
Yep. Oh, that's fun, man.
But
You got me fired up right now.
yeah, no, absolutely. But yeah, I mean, I will say, the one thing about steelhead that I've kind of come to figure out about it is that it's one of those things where, um, when you are lucky enough, you spend enough time and you get lucky enough to get one hooked, like you almost early on, you almost forget that the goal is to land the fish. You just get so like in a trance at what the fish is doing. I remember the first steelhead I hooked, it was about 15 seconds. And, my indicator, it went down and I set the hook and I thought it didn't move. So I thought it was a rock. And then all of a sudden it just jumped and it shook off. And I remember standing there looking at it and my buddy looked at me and he goes, welcome to steelheading. Like that's just, the name of the game.
That's unreal.
So yeah, I mean, it's definitely one of those moments where, at times you just get lost in what you're actually doing, but in the best way possible. Um, so
That's awesome, man. Awesome. So switch it up a little bit on you. So how do your fly choices like change between high water, low water, dirty water? How do you kind of, play that game?
yeah, I mean, I have a lot of flies that I have a lot of confidence in, where it's like, this is the time of year, this is what they should be eating on. And I kind of just know that if I'm going to find a feeding fish, it's probably going to, eat on this. There have also been some times where I have, caught and landed steelhead where I'm like, out of all the flies in my box, that's what you ate. And so I think that, there's definitely a lot of opportunity for reaction strikes or reaction bites. And I think it's really important to, really understand the difference between getting a reaction bite versus, I know that fish ate that fly intentionally. Sometimes it's kind of one of those things, bouncing back to pike where, as you're watching me tie this not so, lovely looking fly,
That looks good to me.
at some point, they're eating because you put something in front of its face enough or the one time and it said, hey, I didn't like that, and now I'm gonna bite. Whereas steelhead, you have moments where it's like, I don't even want to know how many times my fly has drifted past the steelhead and it's just been like, no, not today. And I'm good never knowing that number.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things. I really just think that when I'm out there and if it's like high water and I'm fishing what they should be feeding on, whether it's an egg or whatever pattern, like I'm gonna have confidence in myself knowing about that river and about the fish that's what it should be eating. And I'm gonna keep fishing that because to the best of my ability, that's what I know it should be eating. And there are other days where it's like, if I've had a good year, I've caught fish and I'm, happy with that. Maybe I do have that fly in my box that's, it's a different pattern. I haven't fished it as much. And, that's kind of the time where it's important to be like, yep, like that's where I'm going to try this new pattern and, put it in the ring or put it, give it a test and just be like, either it's going to work or it's going to not. And it's a good day to really like kind of fish that. But, as you fish, I'm sure you run into this at the driftless as well. You probably have your box and, depending upon how you set it up, when you go out, you might know, okay, I know that these are the flies that I want to fish and I'm going to do so because I know that they should be working or I know that's what they should be eating, whether they're eating a dry fly or whether they're eating a streamer. I'll admit I went to the driftless area this fall in October towards the end of the season and I was throwing a streamer and I was throwing a big streamer and I was thinking, if they're, fishing an area I'd never been before, I did, research the night before and I talked to a buddy of mine who had been down there and I said, dude, I got no idea what I'm doing. I'm just going to have a good time. Like if I catch a fish, great. If not, we'll have fun. And, there were a couple times where I saw, some browns that were smaller than my streamer and I was like, all right.
Welcome to the driftless.
Yeah. I think I think that I think I might have done a little too much, but and that's like steelheading too, where there's a time where you just kind of develop that sense of I know what I'm doing is right, and some days it pans out, and it's the day to have a day, and there are other days where it's like that just wasn't that day wasn't for me, and you just have to understand that at some point, again, coming from a guy who I'm not a guide, I'm not professing to know everything about steelheading. I'm just telling you what I know is that the river doesn't owe you anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I've had better days when I go into it thinking, how lucky am I to be able to do this? Where, some people don't know about it and they can't experience the joy that we can experience. They don't, they can't, speak on, the good days, the bad days, whatever. And, how lucky am I to be out here fishing right now? And I think that when I stopped looking at it as the mindset of, well, I went out and I didn't catch a fish, I started adapting my mindset to, okay, I went out, I didn't catch anything, but I fished water where I was confident that fish should be in there. And it just wasn't my day to catch fish. And maybe it was my day to catch. So, I think that, that's like one of my biggest recommendations to new anglers is, steelhead or not. When you can have that growth mindset of, some days are, I might go out and, hook, 10 browns and, land 10 of them. Or I might go out and, see them rising and I can't get them to eat a dry fly. Like whatever it might be, if you can't love the fish saying no and you can't love the fish just, the process of it, then, fishing in general, I'm afraid might not be, your biggest thing. I think that, to answer your question in a concise manner, I don't think that it's necessarily a certain fly specifically. I think that, in my time fishing, I've kind of found what I really like. And within that, that's where I'm gonna be like, all right, this is my confidence. Like, this is where, I think it should be at. This is where I think the fish or what the fish should be eating. And this is where it should be eating. And, that's where I'm going to fish. but some days are good, some days are bad, and you got to take the good with the bad.
You do.
Um, and so, yeah, I mean, just to reference, and again, I know a lot of guys, who watch your podcasts and steelhead fish, they, might have differing opinions, or, they probably will
Of course.
say different things than me, and that's totally fine. Again, I cannot stress enough that I am not a professional.
Me neither, brother.
I do this for fun.
Yeah.
Um, but it is just one of those things where shoot, I lost my train of thought there.
Oh, you're good.
A lot of times when I've had a good day, it's just, I'm going out there, I'm, doing what I really like to do, trying a little bit of new, and I'm just like, I'm out there, and it's a blessing to be out there. Um,
It
and
is.
that's
It
that.
is. Yeah.
So
No, I like that call out where you said that the river doesn't owe you anything.
yeah,
100% agree. The river doesn't owe you anything. The animal, the fish, whatever you're pursuing, they literally don't owe us anything. And I had that exact like aha moment last spring when I did like my turkey trouter video. I was like, okay, like this humbled me. Like it was 3 a.m. I was up going out into the woods and getting my bird and then trying to catch a trout that same day. And I didn't catch my trout till like 8 o'clock that night. And I was like, oh, like I had an emotional moment on the river. I was like, this was awesome, and this is how it's supposed to be. Like you're supposed to
yeah,
work for things, especially if
and
you're taking something's potentially taking something's life, whether you're hunting or fishing to keep. Like you should have to work for it. Otherwise, it's not really fair. So yeah, I definitely agree with you on that part. That's a good
yeah,
call.
and yeah, I mean, I had a moment where I found myself. Um, I found myself just relying on everything that my friend had shared with me, and I was, just repeating spots. And, he and I, like, we had a moment where, he was like, dude, like, we gotta, like, you just, like, why are you happy with that? And I was just like, I was so taken aback. And, me and him, like, we're good now. And, like, you know, but I was like, that was the exact push that I needed, where it's like, you know, I did get to a point where I was like, I love catching fish, and catching fish is awesome. Like
It
I'm not
is.
saying that it isn't, but with steelheading specifically, it's the journey of it's so intimidating, and there's so
It
much
is.
water, and there's so many things to try and learn, that it's like, if you had it all figured out in a day, like it's just like, why do it? And so I really appreciate, and I credit, a lot of stuff to him. Like everything I know is because of him, and he put in so much time, and like, I can't, thank him enough for that. And, he and we had a great conversation before I hopped on this pod, and, we just kind of were talking about it and talking about everything we've done. And it's like, it just
Reflection time.
it kind of puts you back in that spot where it's like, this is why I did it. Like the community about it, just fishing in general, not necessarily steelheading specific, but, you know, fishing in general. It's like, a lot of times I feel like, I'm so guilty of this, but I just get wrapped up in how many fish did I catch this season? What was the biggest fish I caught this season? Where it's like, dude, one of my favorite steelheading memories is my buddy hooked up on a fish, and I was pretty green at this time, and I had the net, and I just started running down the river. I ended up face planting, wet waders, and this is snow on the ground, March, early April, and he ended up losing the fish, and everyone's laughing at me, and I think of that moment fondly, because it's one of those things where it's like, it was never about the fish. And you realize that in that moment where, it was about, the people you were with and the moment. And like, of course, we're bummed we didn't get the fish, but, that's the story that, will be told for years to come about when I, ate it in the river and got wet waders, instead of that one time I was out by myself and I caught a, nice steelhead. So,
I agree, man. That's 100%. Like that was me on my first time last year doing it. Like it was just me and a buddy. We both never did it, and we obviously did our research and did our due diligence. But yeah, at the end of the day, we were like, it's the most intimidating I've ever been. Like coming to a new spot, I was just like,
yeah. And
oh
I think, and I kind of like that about it, where it's like, I didn't start fly fishing until a couple years ago, and this buddy I speak of, his brother and I, we played football together, and I was moving up to Duluth at the time, and he's like, yeah, I mean, you gotta give this a shot. And I was like, all right, like I'll give it the college try. Like it can't be like,
Yeah, right.
as a big walleye fisherman, I'm like, pretty like, if you want to talk walleyes and, yeah, I feel, expert level, on stuff like that. But this was just so, nuanced to me. They're speaking another language, talking about all this stuff. And, but again, it's one of those moments where it's like, as soon as you start doing it, you're just like, I can't imagine, like you're saying, I couldn't imagine, doing something else, or I can't fathom that I didn't do this sooner. Um, so,
Awesome. Another question for you. This is something that I think about a lot, and something that I've kind of really incorporated over the last couple, I'd say a couple months when I've been out, fishing, going back to when the season was open. And the driftless stealth and how you approach a river is incredibly important, especially in that small, clear water. You come over some grass, you come over a hill, and you're busting fish out right and left. So, in your opinion, what is that? How important is approach when you're approaching steelhead?
yeah, I mean, it's definitely the one thing that I didn't necessarily think about right away.
Hmm.
You're fishing a little deeper water. Again,
Yeah.
not super familiar with a lot of the structure of the driftless, but from what I've seen, like a lot of it's shallower, and here you're fishing a little deeper and whatnot. And so it's kind of one of those things where I thought, if I misstepped, or if I, didn't really think about my position, like, maybe I would still be able to get away with it. And I think in a lot of cases, you're going to be all right. I don't think that stealth is necessarily something that needs to be at the forefront of your mind always. But it's also at the same time, like you're saying, like when you step into a hole or when you're fishing a run, like you have got to be thinking of, in relation, where am I? Okay, so take trout for example, steelhead, still trout. What are their predators? Like, it's not, like a perch is afraid of a muskie or a pike. Like their predators come from the sky, so their eyes are pinned up. And you have to be thinking, okay, if this fish is here, like it's going to be looking up, like where's my shadow? Because that's, I'm sure you run into that on the driftless too,
Hmm.
where it's like, if you are walking up over, this hill, and you're about to like step down and the sun's on your back, your shadow is going to be casted down. Like you have to almost, think, okay, where is this fish going to be, and where am I going to be walking, or where am I going to present myself where it could see me? Uh, but again, you run into that same thing where it's like, it's just another level of, maybe you didn't think about it always, but when you start to think about it, you're like, oh crap, like how many fish did I miss because of it? Or like,
Exactly. It's just kind of
what?
always festering in your brain then.
Yeah. And so, and that's, again, I kind of think that that's one of the big beauties about fishing, where it's like, if you just want to show up one time steelhead and just to say you did it, like you can absolutely just be like, yeah, you know what, I tried, I didn't catch a fish, that's for me. Or you can be, like some guys I know where it's like, the time of day is so important, and where I'm standing is so important, and all these things. And you can't tell either person that they're wrong or they're right, because at the end of the day, you know as good as fishing, as good as it is to be good at fishing, there's always luck involved. This past fall, for example, I had a tremendous fall steelheading,
It
hooked up
looked
on
like
a
it.
lot of fish, got a lot of fish in the net. And again, it's not because I'm great. There's a ton of luck involved in what I was doing. And, I just happened to reap a lot of the benefits because of it. And it's, again, it's not because I'm great. Like I will put myself down every single day of the week and, tell you I'm not great, like at what I do. You know, I just think it at some point, it narrows down to luck, and it narrows down to attitude. Are you willing, so not this
And
last fall.
showing up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not this last fall, but the fall prior. I was able to go steelheading probably 3 to 4 days a week, and for quite some, a good amount of time each time. And I caught one jack, and I caught one really nice brown. I caught, it is a 21.5 inch resident brown. So, I mean, it's a
That's a
nice
big fish.
brown.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a good brown, but
I'd be
it's not
fired
one
up,
of those.
bro.
Yeah, I know it's one of those things where you're big, the brown trout lovers that'll watch this will
Yeah.
probably want to punch me in the face,
Yeah.
and I totally understand that. Like I was so stoked, like it's not one of those things where I just say, yeah, it was a 20-inch brown and just, not talk about it. Like trust me, I understand it was a big deal. Like we were all, I was pumped. Was able to get a great picture of it, great video, and release that thing, and it swam off. But when steelhead is on the forefront of your mind and that happens, like it does kind of come across as a slap in the face a little bit. Like again, so excited. I respect the brown trout community. Like I'm not a brown trout hater. I love fish, all fish, whatever. Like even the yearlings, I love them. A lot of like one of my buddies, he likes to poke fun of me. I got one spot that I call the yearling hole. I usually am good for a yearling or two out of the hole, and I love it. They're so beautiful, whether they're 5, 6, 7 inches or 26 or 27 inches. Like they're just a gorgeous fish.
They are.
Yeah.
That's funny. I love that. Yeah, dude. Yeah, 21-inch brown. That would absolutely just put me into a different place down here.
Yeah. No, again, I cannot stress. I was very excited. Awesome. I didn't just say brown trout and
yuck.
Oh yuck! No, I was very excited. Fortunate enough to have some time to get some really good pics of it. Swam off strong, got a good measure on my fish pond net, and that was that. So
that's awesome, man. I love that. All right, so how do you think rain and runoff? Because obviously in the springtime, you're gonna be dealing with a lot of that, especially up in that area. How do you think the rain, runoff, and just water temperatures in general? How does that affect the steelhead movement and the fishing?
It's everything. I'm constantly watching gauges. I'm constantly, looking at temps and all these different things. I know some people that if they don't like the water level, they won't even go. If they don't like the temp, they won't even go. And a lot of it is because, when you look at fish in general and just, the impact that temp has on fish, whether it's walleye, crappie, trout, and again, I'm sure that this is the same in the driftless. It can shut fish off instantly, and it doesn't matter if you had that trip planned for months. Your trip can be kind of ruined in a way. So for them, it's just more so about saving them a trip. Me, whether I catch fish or not, I'm just excited to be there, and so I'll always go regardless. But I've had trips where I've got I had a buddy, one of my really good friends. I took him out, and we're camping out there, we're excited, and everything looks perfect. Rain like 4 inches, maybe not 4 inches, but just downpoured all through the night. And we wake up, and you can't see the top of your wader boot in 6 inches of water. And he was able to get himself another nice brown. That was probably 16 or 17 inches.
That's a beauty.
So yeah, we were super stoked about that. But when you fish all day for 2 days and you catch one fish, that's tough.
Yeah, that hurts. That hurts. Yep.
But again, in the last couple of years, the water level hasn't been desirable necessarily, and we're still able to put some fish in the net. But it is one of those things where we are always we're always saying, okay, what's the CFS? What does the temp look like? That's always at the forefront of our mind. It just has to be. There's not a scenario where if you want to have an opportunity to have the best trip, you have to be paying attention. You have to be paying attention to the rain. You have to be paying attention to the flows. You have to be paying attention to the temp. And it's just one of those things where the sooner you can understand, what does this mean? Like at some point, when I first started, even last year, you talk about growth as an angler. A lot of times I just look at it and be like, oh, all right, that's what it is. And I text my buddy, so what does this mean? And he'd be like, well, drive to the river and look, and you tell me what it means.
Yep.
I'm like, well, that wasn't very helpful. That's not the answer I was looking for. So, you definitely learn to have that be, kind of the second language you're speaking. And when you're doing that, that's when you're going to see a lot more, successful trips where it's like, okay, he like the CFS was this and the temp was this, and I understand that to mean this, and so it's that one thing where understanding the language is hard enough as is, and when you do finally can have that conversation and just be super honest with yourself, like that's the one thing I felt when I first started. I was like, oh yeah, like the river's like this, and my buddy would be like, yeah, it is, and then I would just act like I knew what that meant, and then he's like, okay, well, what does that mean? Like, is it going to be a good day or is it going to be a tough day? And I'm like, well, I don't know. I'm just kind of waiting for you to, I'm kind of
Just
waiting to look
you
at
tell
you
me,
react,
brother.
and yeah, you just tell me, and we'll go off of that. So, but it is kind of one of those things where it's like, as important as it is to watch those numbers and follow those metrics, it's important that you can be honest with yourself and, say, hey, like, I see that's what it says, but I don't really fully know what that means. And so whether you're asking someone else or, even just, we have the super big luxury where we live in, a age where technology is what it is. Ask the internet. The internet's not going to lie to you. The internet's not going to tell you something that it isn't. Like, use that as your biggest tool. Yeah, make the relationship, talk to somebody, and figure out, like, all what that means. But at the same time, like, there's so many different resources out there where it just kind of baffles me. Where the landscape is right now, where you know these are the things that we can ask ourselves, and we can figure those things out pretty quick. And I'm just as, I don't say this from, a pedestal. I'm just as guilty as this, if not more. So,
Couldn't agree more. And yeah, honestly, like, I think one thing that when I think about like steelhead fishing and compared to what I'm used to, like, yeah, at the end of the day, the steelhead, they're migratory fish. They don't just do that for the heck of it. So all of the weather and everything depends on them deciding, when to migrate. So that's just got to be so unique. You can't just pick up and go, hey, I'm going to go steelhead fishing today. Like,
right.
that's not how that's going to work. So I feel like that's another very cool key factor to what makes them special.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think it really boils down to, utilizing your resource, whether someone like me. I mean, I cannot stress enough how fortunate I am to know who I knew and to be able to ask those questions, judgment free. I mean, I would ask questions like, all right, I think that, the water is high, the temps are right, and the fish weren't biting. Am I really that bad? Like, do I need to have, like, am I going to a pawn shop and selling the setup, or, what's the deal here? And then just have them be like, well, no, actually, it's just because of these factors, and that's what you just don't think about it, until you actually are able to spend time and, kind of get through that. So, and I think that, like I said earlier, it all it does is it adds another element to the game where, you weren't sure, if this was going to be like even something like it's not even on your radar. Like, you're not even worried about, what's the air temp. You're not worried about it. You're just you're going fishing.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Exactly. No, yeah, it's so important to have like a mentor to get you. I had someone get me into fly fishing, and yeah, without that, like I don't think I would have stuck with. I
I,
would have hated it. I mean, I did even with them for the first 2 hours. Like, this is the worst thing ever. But then
yeah,
you start to learn, and you start to pick that person's brain, and then yeah, things just
yeah.
evolve.
I say this with 100% confidence that yes, I think I'm a good enough angler to at some point have figured something out to, with luck and, the hard headedness to have gotten one in the net by now, maybe. But the volume of fish that I've landed would not have been possible without just having someone to, especially as knowledgeable as, the guys that I knew, to just be like, yep, all right, this is what we're doing and this is why we're doing it. And, some days it's going to work and some days it's not. And like without that, oh, I mean, it completely changes the game. So if anyone is listening and they're really wanting to get into it, my best advice is find somebody that knows what the heck they are doing, because they will save you just so much time.
Yeah, I
So
believe that. I believe
yeah,
that 100%. Awesome. So you've kind of touched base on this a little bit, but you've said it, and I think anyone who wants to steelhead fish, they're famous for being very humbling. How do you get yourself to show up every time when you've had those days where it's like this isn't it?
yeah. I mean, just in reference to, kind of what I was talking about earlier, there was that, that fall where I caught no steelhead. I mean, I had one nice jack, and some people will consider a jack a steelhead, but a jack just being a juvenile, like a teenager.
Sure, like a Jake and yeah,
Yep.
turkeys.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yep, like a perfect analogy. But it's one of those things where, you know, kind of what my buddies had said, and just like the general thought process of like, at some point, like, when I get a fish in the net, I want it to be without a question, without a shadow of a doubt, that's a steelhead all day long. And this last fall, I landed my first fall steelhead, and that was just like, I remember I was by myself, and again, kind of just walking by a spot, didn't really know if there would be anything there. Second or third drift through, felt the tug, set the hook, and we're on. Fortunate enough to get it landed. And, it's just one of those moments where, it was just so cool. But I think that, kind of what I had said earlier, just understanding that the river doesn't owe you anything. If you want to go out, and catch a lot of fish, pick up pan fishing,
Yeah,
like
bunnies.
go fish for sunfish, go fish for crappies, you know, and if your goal is to catch a ton of fish, go do that. If your goal is to learn so much about yourself and learn a lot about, the big why behind what you're doing, that is where, steelheading then becomes for you. Uh, I think, one of my biggest recommendations, I guess, um, would be, you have to have that attitude of, every day is a learning opportunity. And, whether you're going to catch a ton of fish or you're not going to catch a single one, you have to go into it with the mindset of, am I going to walk away with, saying, yeah, I mean, there's just no fish in the river? Or am I going to walk away saying, this is what I tried, this is where I tried, and it didn't work, but I'm going to keep that in my mind because it should have. And then when I go out the next time, when I go out the next time, I might try this a little differently. Or maybe I'll present this, with one extra split shot or one less split shot. Or maybe, I need to swap my flies, and like, have one on top and one on bottom or vice versa. Or maybe, you know, the weather was bad or whatever reason it might be. Like when you really start to, do that internal analysis and being like, okay, I understand, I think this is why. That's when you'll find out you're able to read water better and faster. You're able to find more fish. And it's almost like it's just a confidence thing,
It
where it's
is.
like, I know, like if you get me on one of my hometown lakes and you're saying, it's opener and you need to go catch, 5 walleye, like, yeah, absolutely. I know exactly where we're going. I know exactly what we're throwing. Like we'll have the limit in, right away. And I think in steelhead, like you have to have a little bit of a swagger. And I remember, when I first started fishing with my buddy, he was just like, there was just something different around him, but he's going out there having, 4 or 5 fish days. And I'm like, how's he doing this? Like we're fishing the same water, we're doing the same thing, and I'm not hooking, but he is. But he's just got this swagger that comes from time on the water, and
That's what it
he's
is.
just, yeah, and he's just able to be like, yep, there's a fish. Oh, yep, we're on. And I'm just like, all right, I grabbed the net for the 1200th time today, it seems like, and land the fish because I'm an awesome net man. 100% net ratio for that guy.
Woof. Woof.
But yeah, and that's just the thing where it's like, not being cocky, I'm not saying that, but you got to go into each day knowing, yeah, the river doesn't owe me anything, but I'm going to go and ask it, to say, hey, I'm going to show up today, and maybe you say no, but I'm going to be right back here tomorrow with my rod in my hand, doing the same thing, and just, you have to be a little bit of a psycho, you know it's one of those things. Whenever I know I'm going steelheading the next day, I can't sleep. I'm
Yeah,
like,
that's
it's one of
good.
those, yeah, and it's one of those things where it's like, we have our superstitions maybe where, we stop at the gas station, we'll get, the same drink, same breakfast sandwich, and, that might lead to a good day, but, just the excitement of, when you're driving there, it starts to build, you're getting closer. But you get out, you get your waders on, and the minute you step in the water and you hear the water rushing, and it's just for me personally, it just flips a switch, and I'm ready to be there. but I just, kind of like I had said earlier, like you almost get into this trance like state where, you're not just going through the motions, but everything, it slows down a little bit and you have time, think about life. Like, where am I in life? Like, this is where I'm at. Like, I'm going to be present. But then you also have those moments where it's like, I've had, some of the best days by myself where I'm able to just go. And sometimes I'll just sit next to the river, listen to the river, and just, sit there and just,
Absolutely.
just soak it all in.
Yeah.
And I think that, that kind of feeling where you get that peace, serendipity is the word that comes to mind. Where you truthfully get to embody that in what you're doing. And it truthfully is, a feeling like no other. And unfortunately, I'm not really certain that a lot of other, types of fishing, can give you that. I I found it, in, walleye fishing sometimes and in pike fishing other times, but not to the level that steelheading gives you. So I think, if you're watching this and you're like, yeah, I'm gonna give steelheading a try this fall or this spring, whatever time you're able to go, just have a heart of gratitude. I feel like that's the one thing we take for granted. Like, we're able to do this thing called fishing. Whether you're a brook trout guy, brown trout guy, steelhead, whatever you do, like, we're able to do this and it's such a unique outlet and platform. Like, even like you're talking about, like, we connected and, we're able to have this great chat here and, it's just an awesome thing and it's just something that you can't really find anywhere else. I honestly feel really bad, for people that aren't able to experience it to the fullness that we're able to at times. It's just one of those things that when you really slow things down and have a heart of gratitude, I think that's when you find yourself in moments of, catching more fish. And some people will be like, nope, it's about water temp, water levels, what fly I'm tossing, what I'm doing. But man, I would really argue that, there is a second level to it that, people can miss out on. And at the end of the day, I feel for those people. I
I do
mean, I
too.
know that they're catching fish, and I know that they're catching fish or doing something because otherwise they wouldn't be doing it. But man, I just have had some phenomenal days where, like I said, a lot of my favorite days on the river aren't days where I catch fish. And I think that those are just moments that you can't really, you can't change for anything in the world.
I agree. I think that's a great call out, the gratitude part, because I think what's really hard for people in our modern world is they see something like, let's say, steelhead fishing. They do a little research, they follow some accounts, and they see these people catching these beautiful big steelhead, and they think, I'm gonna do this one time, and I'm gonna go catch, 5 steelhead, and they're like, well, blah 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 does it on the internet, blah blah blah. Why can't I? And it's like, but that's different. It's not just something you pick up and go and just do. And I think that's very, very important for people to, understand. Just be grateful you had the chance to go out. And if you catch a fish, phenomenal. And like you said earlier, if it's a one time thing to say you did it, great, close that door. Or maybe it takes over your life and you become obsessed.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where a lot of times, some of the more fonder moments that I've had, steelheading have been just talking to people, and I've talked like this conversation comes to mind. It was that first, or no, it must have been one of the other ones I landed, but I'd hooked one and landed one, and hooked one and lost one, and I was talking to one gentleman, and he hadn't had any luck today, and he had asked me, just kind of exchanging pleasantries as we walked by, and he's like, yeah, any luck? And I was like, yep, hooked one, landed one, hooked one, lost one. And he's like, that is just, such a phenomenal day. And he had been out doing the same thing and he hadn't even hooked one. And it's that moment where it's like, I could have just, truthfully, like, you can brag and be like, well, I'm better steelhead fisherman. Like, I caught one, you didn't. But it's like, you get in that moment and you realize, not everyone's catching fish, kind of like you were saying. Some days are good days and some days are bad days. And you just have to understand that, at some point you're going to have a good day. It's bound to happen with a little bit of luck. It's going to happen, but there are going to be other days where, oh, why am I doing this? Like, I just, I don't know why I do this. I shouldn't do this ever again. And, I think that when you kind of are able to, kind of like to use the word graduate, because it's definitely a, you know, an understanding that you come to where, all of a sudden it made a lot of sense and it clicked and you're putting it together, all the pieces of the puzzle, and you're catching a lot of fish. But then you go out and you have a humbling day and you're like, I remember why I do it, and it's not just always to catch fish. And again, I do think, that's probably a controversial opinion to some people. Some people, if they're all about catching fish, that's great.
Yeah.
And, I think that's kind of like the beauty of it, right? Where, everyone has an opportunity to interpret things differently, and nobody is necessarily wrong and no one's necessarily right. I speak from this space of, personal opinion. And, I think that fishing in general, if you go out and all you do is expect to catch fish, like honestly, at the end of the day, I feel so sorry for you.
Same.
Because you've missed the entire point. It never was about how many fish you caught or the biggest fish that you caught. At some point, it's about who you're doing it with and why you're doing it. So I think it's so important. Even this fall, like there was a lot of times where I was on a streak of every time I went out, not only did I hook a steelhead, but I landed a steelhead.
Yeah, that's a hot streak.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where it's like when I finally went out and didn't land one, I just was like, yeah, A, I was due, but B, it really just allowed me to be like, why am I doing this? Why am I spending so much time doing this? And I think it's something that it's so easy to lose sight of in the long run.
It is.
I mean, stay, be confident, but stay grounded.
Stay grounded, yes, and have that time for reflection. That reflection's huge. Like it really is. Because if you find yourself, going out for the wrong reasons, like you're gonna start to hate it then, and it's like, well, why am I doing this? So it's very important to have those. And I had a couple moments this last summer where I'm not gonna say I was fishing too much because I don't think that's like ever really a real statement, but I was going a lot, and it was just like, all right, man, like take a step back. Like, are you just trying to, catch that PB? Are you just trying to get content? Are you just like, what are you doing this for? And I had to have that moment with myself where I was like, okay, slow down, leave the cameras at home for, a week or two, and just go back to when you were that dude out in a pasture having no clue what you were doing, and you were smiling from ear to ear because you were fly fishing in a river and there was cows walking around. Like, that's that feeling you can never let go of, and it's very important.
Yeah, and it's a feeling you can't lose, but it's important that you remind yourself of that feeling. I mean, not coming from a fly fishing background, let alone a steelheading background, I think that that's the one emotion that I had to ask myself, where it's like, why do I fish? I don't keep steelhead, so it's not to harvest fish, but there's so many reasons why I do it. And I think that a lot of times, it's very easy, like you're saying, you get wrapped up in the camera or posting on Instagram, doing it for clicks. Not you specifically, anyone that
right
happens to do that. And I think that there's a lot of times where it's like, if you can't be honest with yourself and have that conversation of, like for me specifically, like, I grew up fishing, and that's just what I did. And, I couldn't imagine a world where I didn't do that. But how awesome is it that I'm able to do that? Because of that, pure love for the sport, it's important that I understand every time I go out, even if it's right before I go out, to have that conversation of, all right, why are we going out today? It's not like you're saying, it's not all like, of course, every time I'm thinking like, how can I catch, a nice fish? But it's important to also realize, at some point, like this wasn't just, to be on, a podcast one day. This wasn't to, have that sweet Instagram post. Like, there's a deeper meaning to it all. So.
There always is. Yes, I agree. So, question for you, as anglers or just people that, care about steelhead, how can, we help protect these runs for future generations?
Yeah. I mean, this one might get a little heat, but it's my opinion. Like I said, just, seconds ago, I don't harvest steelhead. Some people will disagree with that. From what I've heard, they taste great. And are really good table fare. Again, I don't speak from personal experience. But just keeping that in mind, like when I started fly fishing, I never ever thought about keeping a trout and eating a trout. And there's definitely a lot of places where I think it's appropriate to keep and eat a trout. But for steelhead specifically, that was never really an idea of mine. And a lot of people who might not necessarily fish a ton are kind of like, well, isn't the whole point of fishing to go catch a fish and then eat that fish? Like you just spent all
I
that
get that a
time,
lot.
energy,
Yeah.
effort, like why aren't you doing that? And I'm like, well, unfortunately, you kind of miss the point because, yeah, it's always cool to, catch a fish and eat a fish because, walleyes, perch, crappie, like, yeah, they taste good. But, at some point there, it doesn't get to a line where, that's not what it's about. And so I think that, just always when you're going out, whether it's trout fishing or steelheading, like, you know, leave the fillet knives at home, right? Just go out with the mindset of, I really want to interact with a really cool fish. And, I think that, you know, maybe that it's not in the cards for me today or ever to really consider harvesting that fish. So I think that that is probably like one of the big things. One big effort that you can do as you're fishing. So, when you're handling these fish, and again, this goes for all trout, wet your hands, please. It's
Hmm.
one of those things where, to new anglers, they might not know. We have oils on our skin that when we touch trout, we'll leave holes and we'll leave burns, and it's very bad for those fish. It is very important that you wet your hands. No gloves. I don't care. There have been times where it's been, 20 degrees and I got to wet my hands in cold water, and that's just, it is what it is.
It is what it
Um,
is. Part of it. Yep.
you
Keeping
just
that
got to
fish in the
do
water. That's
it.
super key too. Yeah.
I would, yep. And that's the thing, I will admit, this last spring, I was fortunate to get and to land a steelhead by myself. That was really close to that 30-inch mark. Because I was by myself, unfortunately, I couldn't really get like a true and accurate measurement. So I can't sit here and tell you that it was a legit dirty 30, but
Hey,
it
that's all
was,
right, man.
regardless, it was a big fish. And to me, I did, like, selfishly, I really wanted a picture of it. I'm
Of
by
course.
myself, don't have a GoPro. And so, A, it taught me invest in a GoPro. But B, it also taught me, like I'm trying to set my phone up on the riverbank, keep this fish in the net while I'm
Yeah.
doing it, and that was a struggle.
Yeah.
Um, and there were some various other things like that. That is just like you know, but it was a pre-spawn female,
Ooh.
and so it was full of roe or egg, whatever you want to call it. And I ended up I set my phone up on a video, held it up, and all of a sudden I noticed it started dropping because they'll do that as like a defense mechanism. As soon as I noticed it was dropping, I put it back right away. Selfishly, of course, like I would have loved to have just taken thousands of pictures of that
Yeah.
thing from every possible angle.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but it's one of those things where you kind of have to be you have to be real with yourself and ask back to that question, am I trying to harvest this fish? No, so I got to do everything I can to make sure this fish swims off. So little efforts like that, keeping them in the water. If you happen to come into a fish that's in spawn, put it back right away as soon as like if you pick up a female hen with eggs, you're gonna know. You can feel the eggs. It's got a little extra weight. You know, keep it in the water. If you're with a friend, that's just so much easier. Keep its head in the water. You know, just hold it underneath the surface. Take a picture. It looks sweet. A lot of times, like with that fish, honestly, like I got a lot of great pictures of it, and I'm totally not mad of like what I got, because the experience is everything. But honestly, I wish that I was with a friend because a fish like that, having it in the water, would have been so much cooler than
Yeah.
all the other pictures and videos I got of it. So I think it's important to kind of keep that in mind, where it's like, you know, oh, but I want this angle and this angle. Well, when you're by yourself, you got to adapt. But when you're with somebody, you know, those in the water pictures look just as good, if not better,
Yes.
um, in the water. So, and then just, having a respect for the fish where, um, like if you see a fish is, dropping back or moving, like, or if you see a fish is spawning, like, don't cast at it. Just let it do its thing. Like there was a couple times where I'd seen some kings that were spawning, um, and some like really zombied out kings, and they're not really looking to eat, but it's one of those things where you're like, that's a giant fish, and I'm sure that it would have fought super hard, but in that moment I was way too mesmerized with what it was doing to try and even think about trying to fish. But the same thing with steelhead. Like when you see them doing their thing, if you're fortunate enough to see them, like, let them do it, because that right there, if you see one spawning or about to spawn and you go and you just cast at it and you end up plucking it from what it was doing, like, that is what, you talk about directly impacting the generations. Like that will have, a pretty big effect, because, maybe you catch the fish right when it was about to spawn, and, it's spawning while it's dropping eggs while it's fighting, or as soon as you landed, it just starts dropping, and, you pulled it out of the water and now it's all over the land. And, especially if it's a nice one, because, you want those generations to be strong.
Yeah, yeah, those genetics are good. Yeah, yeah.
So I think there's little nuances like that where, again, my same buddy was like, I'm glad you got your pictures, but, for next time, like, really consider these 3 things. And, in that moment when someone gives you feedback, you can either be frustrated,
Yeah.
or you can just be like, you know what, that's something I didn't even think about. Thank you for telling me about it. And
Agreed.
next time, you're ready. Like, for example, on one buck that I had caught, again, fishing by myself, which again, I have pictures and videos to have proof that I caught these fish. But one buck that I had caught, I was releasing it downriver, and it's important to release fish upriver, so the water can really move through their gills, oxygenate fish. But again, it's like, he wasn't coming from a place of, never steelhead again, X, Y, and Z. He's coming from a place of, hey, like, this is just one thing to consider, and so I think that it's really important. And a lot of times we almost lose that, where it's like, the minute someone tells me something that wasn't necessarily on the forefront of my mind, like all of a sudden we get super hostile, or we can be super hostile. And I think it just serves as a really good reminder to, remember, okay, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. And, if I want to enjoy this for a while, or to my kids or grandkids to enjoy this, like, it's important that we take care of what we got.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah, no, that's a good call. I mean, yeah, especially posting stuff. You post stuff on Insta, you post stuff on YouTube. Like people are gonna voice their opinion. They're gonna tell you things, and it's like, majority of people aren't trying to be a hole. They're just trying to help you and educate you. And it's like, yeah, sometimes you can be like, well, you can get fired up from it, but it's like, no, they're not trying to make you mad or make you feel stupid. They're just trying to help.
right.
That's something that I was like, okay, yeah.
Yeah, and it's also one of the things where it's like, have confidence in what you're doing.
Yeah.
If you're practicing, safe releases, and you're doing everything you can, at some point, like, people are going to talk, and, you don't always have to, listen to what they say, but, sometimes they might be wrong. Like, it's a real possibility that, sometimes people are wrong. And so I think it's as important as it is to, listen to what people have to say. Also understand that, maybe some people on the internet aren't right, and I think that that's especially important in, fish handling practice, because, there's a lot of times where it's like, what that guy had to say, like, I think he was onto something, but I don't necessarily think he was, really super correct in what he was trying to say. And so, I like to think, like, at some point in whatever he was trying to say, like, maybe there was something that was really true, and maybe there was something that was super beneficial for me to hear. And, maybe that's the case, maybe not. That is up for you to determine, as an angler. But it never hurts. There are so many things, again, that I don't know. But
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
there are a lot of things that I've heard where it's like, oh, like, maybe that wasn't applicable in this situation, but it really might be applicable in the next one. And so, just really hearing what people have to say, is an important thing.
I agree. I agree. All right, I'm gonna switch it up and ask you one question on northern pike. So
All right.
I'm gonna give you one hypothetical, not even hypothetical, just a personal like kind of opinion on pike fishing.
Yeah.
Summer, spring, or fall, or winter. Well, no, we're not gonna do winter. We're gonna do summer, spring, or fall. What is your favorite time of the year?
Whew, that's a good one.
Or you don't even have to pick one. You don't have to pick one.
I think, I think the fall is an exciting time. Turnovers happening in the lakes, in the rivers. Um, and a lot of times they're putting on their winter coats, and so
Yeah,
they're getting a little beefier. And that's pretty exciting, whether it's pike, muskie, walleye, any of that kind of fishing. That's when you're going to see a lot of your thick fish.
yeah, those feed bags.
Um, I think the summer is pretty good because you can still find them up shallow,
Hmm.
and which makes it easy on the fly to target. You're not worried about trying to get down 15, 20, 30 feet.
That's just it.
Um, and the weather's hot. They're really active. The Linders put out a great book a long time ago that talked about a lot of breaking down just walleye fishing. And when I was younger, I'd read it, didn't really do anything, was kind of just flipping through the pictures, and oh well, they're using that, so that must be good and whatnot. And that's just kind of the thing. And but when I kind of finally started looking at it from the lens of, I think that, reading, like when I got older and started reading it, actually finding, really good things to take from it. I saw one portion of them talking about water temp,
Hmm.
and, they're talking about cold water. Their behavior is, negative to neutral. Coldish water, they're pretty neutral. Warm water, they're pretty positive. And, I started applying that to just fishing in general. And, when the water is warm, not hot, but warm, you can have some really good fishing. And so I think that, some of the best, pike fishing that I've had have been, in those, mid to early summer days. You can still find them up shallow. You can find them deeper, suspended in weeds, hunting bait fish. But during that transition period from late spring into early fall, or excuse me, late spring into early summer, I've had a lot of success with pike in general. Um, I recently started targeting pike and muskie on the fly. No muskies landed to my name yet. Haven't necessarily tied up a lot of big catalog. I can kind of showcase this fly a little bit.
Yeah.
It's just got this nice little jointed pattern that I like. It's got two hooks on it, which I also like. Uh, and so I would probably personally classify this as a deceiver fly. Just really trying to imitate bait fish. That one I guess more like a shad, or you know perch, but not really color pattern to perch. I don't have the material. Um, but when you're fishing those kind of patterns, that may be a little small for muskie, but definitely still feasible. Those are kind of the moments where you know what you're fishing and how you're fishing is crucial. And then when you're able to cast those up towards banks, whether you're working docks or you're working reeds or different structures, like you're really able, that thing will just find fish. I mean, it's just a really big magnet. I wish I had it on me, but it's in my car, on my little roof rack inside the car. I've got a hall of fame up there for
Yep.
flies and various lures. And
I love
I caught a 42-inch pike on the fly last summer,
big pike.
and that deceiver fly was what did her in. And it's just one of those things where, you know, when you're steelheading, you're so specific to, you're tying, you're trying to tie up bugs. Same thing with trout. You're trying to tie up bugs. You're imitating hoppers. Different various flies. And with the pike, it's kind of, what can I make that's atrocious? Will
Yeah.
make a little sound without having a
Freaking Christmas
rattle.
tree.
Yeah, and will just really catch their eye. And I think that fishing that deceiver fly, in that late spring and summertime, whether it's a deceiver, a clouser, any kind of streamer patterns, um, you can have a lot of success. And then get ready for an arm workout. It's when you're hooking those flies all day long, it's
Good.
tiring.
Yeah, on an 8 weight, 7 weight, yeah.
Yeah,
You're
yeah.
starting to feel
So
it, yeah.
But yeah, I mean that I've done really well on pike in general, not even on the fly in springtime. A lot of time, a lot of the bait fish is shallow. A lot of other fish like walleyes, crappies, perch, sunnies, they're spawning, they're shallow. Fish just really congregate, shallow during that time. Um, and then as it cools off, you'll kind of find them in periods. Muskies, they can be shallow during July. They're sunbathing, they're looking for the sun, they're shallow, and then they'll go and cool off. And I think pike are the same. You'll find them being a little transitional during those times as far as location goes.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I
But
agree. My best time was like that September October transition. It was just
yeah,
I was like, wow, they are very very active. They're very shallow, so like you said, you don't have to worry about getting 20 feet deep. And a lot of the lakes I was on were they maybe would get 18 feet at most, so it was pretty shallow stuff. And oh, dude, I had a day where I got a 36 and a 35, and I was like, all right, I want to do this all the time. I like stopped thinking about trout entirely. I was like,
yeah.
I just want to do
And
this.
yeah, and that's just the thing where I mean, even right now, I mean, steelheading season is soon approaching, and
hmm
here I am tying pike flies, which
Yeah.
is later on the docket, but it's just one of those things where you know I think a lot of fly fishing purists out there, that only target trout, they're missing out. I mean,
That was
you
me.
can
Yeah.
you can knock pike as slime rockets, trash fish, whatever. They're just a wasted catch. But when you do them, on the fly, it's
Dude,
I
they're
mean
just a cool fish in general. I thoroughly like them as just a fish. I think they're
yeah,
beautiful. I think
yeah,
they taste good too if you do it right, and they're just really cool fish. And like even pulling them through the ice, like they're
yeah,
freaking awesome fish.
yeah, absolutely.
I just big fan. That's awesome, man. I can't wait for the ice to get out and in that spring, that spawn. I'm gonna have some fun.
Absolutely. So yeah, I mean, if you're thinking about steelheading, I think it's a great place to start. But fly fishing on the fly, that's also not too bad as well.
Right, exactly. Because I mean, at the
So
end of the day, it's a predator, and they're willing to
yeah,
eat and willing to
yep,
just get something out of their area. And it's like, all right,
yeah,
if there's pike in a lake, you're probably going to get a bite.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
If not, I mean, I don't know. It could be some other factors, but you should probably
Yeah,
get a bite.
yeah, absolutely. If you're willing to go and try, I mean,
Yeah,
yeah, you'll probably get something.
probably
So
get something. Awesome, Max. Well, this was a great conversation. Is there anything else you want to touch base on while we are chit chatting?
yeah, I mean, I guess if you have any other questions, comments, or concerns about pike, I mean, we could talk about that for a little bit here. Otherwise, I mean, I don't really have anything. Just I can't stress enough. Just you know, why whatever reason it is why you fish, whether it's a family member showed you how, or you're watching people on YouTube or Instagram do it, whatever got you in there, do whatever you can to preserve that, because that's a feeling that I remember, just growing up, I just remember always having a fishing rod in my hand, and it's just it's stuck with me for so long now, and I couldn't imagine spending my free time any other way. Um, and so you know, steelheading or pike on the fly, whatever it is, it really allows me to, recenter myself and remember why I do it. And, that just makes it, so much more rewarding when you get a fish, and, really just brings out, a lot of the best, core memories of, my first fish, or, whatever it may be. So I can't stress that enough. Um, yeah. So
Awesome, awesome. No, I couldn't agree more. I think that's important for people to always have that conversation and always keep that in the back of your mind. Whatever you do in life, it's just always important why you do it and what keeps
yeah,
you going, and that's always
for
gonna be the
sure.
most important thing at the core.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I can't think of, better life lessons to have learned through fishing. Patience and, even loss and gain, winning and losing, and,
Especially fly fishing.
perseverance. Yeah, absolutely. Perseverance is a big one as well. Just um, really just, at the end of the day, going back to the start of it, and going back to it at its core, and yeah. So
Awesome. Awesome. Well, great, Max. I will let you get back to your evening. I do want to thank you for being my first guest of 2026, my first
yeah,
guest of season 2. So I really
yeah.
appreciate you taking the time. I know it's not easy to always coordinate things, especially in the busy world. So thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. Hopefully we'll do this again soon.
Absolutely.